lounge chairs and the rugs and stuff. Can you maybe
Well,
talk about as far as
yeah.
how you set up as a class? I mean, where your instruments are, if they use instruments, if, you know, the machinery, the things
Well,
like
one
that.
thing that's important in dealing with a fine art school as opposed to um, what do you call the other kind of an art school? No, the kind where you're learning a trade. Vocational arts, yeah. Thank you. Where you're training the schools where you're training people to be musicians, composers, painters. In that kind of a situation, there is no tradition. You can't say what I could not build an art school. I could tell you what I would need if I were teaching at that art school. So what's required in that, and it's a very difficult problem, I don't know how it's resolved, but what's required is to deal with the people there on a one-to-one basis and to come up with some kind of a need orientation. Just really simple example. When the art studios were made, there was no thought about conceptual art, no thought about happenings, and no thought about structures that were larger than the largest canvas that could fit into a normal museum situation. There were no facilities that would allow Christo to teach there, who would be dealing with, putting a curtain across the Grand Canyon or something like that. It depends on the people you're dealing with, because it's a very highly individualized situation. So the first thing that is required, I could not tell you what one needs. I can tell you what I need, and that won't do you any good because I'm not going to be involved in your building. But
well,
what
yes,
it,
you are, as far as I know, you are our client as far as the music end of it.
oh, well, then I could tell you what I need, yeah. But it would be very personalized. It would not give you the next even electronic music studio. Only some things would remain somewhat the same.
But your experience,
But basically,
your
it's, I mean,
experience with others there to describe.
Yeah, I could give you I could give you all the artists that I know. I could tell you pretty much what they needed. All the
general
composers.
things, you know, I mean, like, just common sense wise, I mean, you have to have a room that's at least acoustically, you know, set up to,
Well, that's an
accommodate itself.
interesting problem too. The first problem I ran into with the acoustics of the electronic music studios, the first problem I ran into was that Thornton had, with I suppose good consultation, come up with a terrifically soundproofed and acoustically perfect room by an acoustician's descriptions. And what I wanted was a room that had the acoustics of a normal living room, which just blew their minds, because, I mean, they thought if you had anything you wanted, you would obviously have the best thing. And I said, no, because the people who are listening to my music are not going to have this kind of a room. I want to hear what they're going to hear. I want to hear what the situation, I want to be able to mock up. I wanted a prototypical situation where I could mock up various kinds of acoustical situations. So all that had to be changed. They got rid of standing waves in the room, but standing waves are important for a composer, for me, to have to deal with, because that's what I have to deal with. I don't have utopia out there.
Standing waves.
Well, standing waves are when, especially in the low frequencies, where a wave, the waveform nulls, they overlap in such a way that they drop out, and you can't hear the low. It doesn't. Anyway, these are acoustical problems that were solved literally there, but were of no use to us. We had to change all of those.
Could you describe a little bit about what the students' living situation is there?
Yeah, one of the things that we have, the existing living situation there is that we have a dormitory. We had finally Thornton could tell you the exact amount. I think we cut the dorm situation by half finally, because we happen to believe that the students, except for to have a very minimal amount of dorm space, the students by and large would prefer to go out into the community and rent housing and so forth, and that some of the money and energy used in setting up complicated dormitory situations would be better used searching out, getting search committees and finding places in the community and things of that sort. So the actual dorm situation was a compromise, and I think is somewhere half of what was originally designed, and to the best of my knowledge has remained, even at that, only 2/3 full. It's been a big problem. It hasn't paid for itself.
Does that mean it's not a highly desirable place to live?
They're very nice, but the kind of student who would tend to come to an art school would prefer to have an old shack and shack up than have a nice pristine dormitory of some sort.
Well, along that same line, then, do you feel that the students would?
It probably doesn't fit anyone's lifestyle. Probably doesn't fit Thornton Ladd's lifestyle. I mean, he probably would not want to live there. It's the idea. It's an institutional ideal that you can bring people around to look at. In fact, you can ask him about this because it's a rumor. I hear that in the early days there were holes in doors with windows in them in the early design, so people could walk around and watch people working at their art. It's a showcase, and most people really don't like to work in showcases. And I think if it were the kind of place that they liked, that fit their lifestyle, they probably would want to live right there.
So were the dormitories in some way, were they provided with a workspace for the students, not just, a place to sleep and
The students were given, the facilities at CalArts are terrific in terms of workspace for students and faculty. They're fabulous. And the students are all given shops to work in. I mean, not individual shops, but shops to work in, individual spaces where individual spaces are necessary, and so forth and so on. And they spend, it's a very anachronistic kind of situation. We have hot plates and bunks, and mattresses and things strewn in a place which is fairly elegant by anyone's standards who happens to be sleeping in it. It feels funny. But some of the students have done some remarkable jobs of redecorating, for instance, the insides by giving it a different kind of flavor. But they do have places to work, and they spend probably 80% of their waking time or 90% of the waking time at the school. But their personal life is generally in the community in some place.
Mark, would you discuss the flexibility change that's gone on while you've been there? I'm sure there's been a great number of people on staff that have changed what's gone on within the building, how much has been turned around, how much has been held static.
In terms of the building itself, or
the building and also the faculty and the change in needs that have gone
the
on. Say the beginning time that one
yeah.
program till what's this 6-7 years later.
Right. The biggest change, the two biggest changes. One was in the faculty, which is on a steady decline. The number of people fired or let go has been enormous. I think we're probably 50% where we were when we started in terms of numbers. I think there are only about 8 of us left from. There are only about 3 of us left from the original 14 or 4 of us, and only about maybe 10 or 12 or 14 or 15 of the original faculty. I don't know. It's a very small number of the original faculty. It's been a terrific turnover.
What effect is this had on the physical?
Well, what's really remarkable about it, which is a prediction that a couple of us had, was that the students who came in have kept the place from changing, because once you get students who are terrifically motivated and want to stay on, they want to be there for 4, 5, 6 years, and they're paying for the place. So you have 80% of the students are sitting there and they're projected into the future for the next 4 years. You can't just hire anybody you want. You've got to hire somebody that will keep the students there. So the replacements for people have tended to be very similar to the original people. The place has internally has changed very little as a result of the student hold on it. And it will take for the other 20% to gradually, they can bring new kinds of students in, and that's the only way they can really change the place. It would take another 7 years before that will be a complete turnover. And I think it will happen. It will gradually change into more of a vocational school than an art school. That's the direction it tends to be going. But it's very slow, and the students are holding it from changing. In terms of the building, the single biggest problem with the building in terms of future plans is that the original number of students was designed to be about 1,500, I think, something like that. So that, the school was put in 3 stages, and I believe 2 of the 3 stages were completed. So the facilities are more than, in the last stage it was an auditorium or something like that. So the facilities are like 90% completed for 1,500 students. And now the top number of students we'll ever have, according to the way we're doing it, is 600. So sometimes you walk around and it feels like you're just in a tomb somewhere because there's nobody around. It's to have 600 people walking around in a place that was designed not only for 1,500 students, but the faculty that would be required for 1,500 students it's
So how much of it is not being used?
well, probably there's a way to use the whole building. I mean, probably in some sense of the word, the whole building is used. But
By giving large individual studios to students?
yeah, and having 2 offices for, like instead of having your secretary sitting in the outside of your office, the secretary has a whole office or something like that. I don't know. So the whole place will be used in some sense of the word. We've expanded electronic music studios. We're using practice rooms for that and things like that. We don't have a space problem. We do have certain needs that we don't have, like with the auditorium not having been built creates a problem. But the building is more than we really need at this point. In fact, I heard that they're renting out some spaces to outside people.
That movable theater?
Yeah, the what's it called? The modular theater was you should really get involved in the technical side of that. And so I don't know the technical side of it, but I can tell you from the practical side that this is a theater. Do they know about it? This is a theater which is built. Herb Blau designed it. He's a theater director, and they have 4-foot square platforms. The whole inside is made of 4-foot square platforms, which are on, I think, pneumatic lifters. And they go almost up to the ceiling. They go very high, and all the way down to the lowest thing. And therefore, you could design any floor space you want. It ought to be a dream, a utopian dream of some sort, except that it exists, as far as I know, in only 2 forms. It exists in a theater of the round with a platform down below and all the seats around that way, and another configuration, which is a proscenium configuration, where the seats are around the front and the stage is over there. Because to move the thing and change it, first you can't have anyone around, and for some reason, and this I don't know why, it costs a fortune every time you move any one of those things. So it's just been a complete bust for most of our uses. We try to have a rehearsal in there, like if you're going to double up on a use, and they're having a theater rehearsal, and they happen to have the platform set for a production. And we want to have a rehearsal and expand the stage a little bit. There's no way we can do it. So there's no way you can just walk in and use that space and just put it into your configuration.
What would you suggest for an alternative?
Well, I think the basic idea of modularity or changeability is really important. I just think that the technology that was used was the wrong technology.
Would you rather see like several smaller theaters?
Well, what I would prefer to see would be very neutral spaces all the way through. I would prefer to see spaces that, first of all, could be cheaply. The best space we had in the electronic music studios was at Villa Cabrini. I hope you don't tell Thornton. I mean, you can if you want, but the best space we had was a rented space. We got double trailers and put them together, and that modularity was terrific because we could just go endlessly with that. When we outgrew something, we just add some more on. It's got all the business type things, have all the electrical appliances in there. It was just terrific, and we felt really free with those things. Ceilings weren't very high, but that was about the only single problem we have.
So actually with a 24-foot width and an 8-foot high ceiling, you were satisfied?
Well, we could double them up. I mean, we could expand them. You can go.
Keep on coming.
Yeah, you can keep on going in both directions. You can make them wider. You can make them longer, and not only that, but you could place them in places that were acoustically better than anything you could do in a building, because they're outside and they've got the whole outside to keep them from going from one to the other. What has had to happen to get our studios isolated is that we live in dungeons there. No windows. I mean, we could have windows in those things because there was no one to bother. We were in the woods. But now we have to have rooms where there are no windows, no fresh air, no natural light. If you happen to work for 7 hours and the sun goes down, you walk out and you have heart failure because the world has changed outside and you didn't know it. I think modularity or changeability is really important, but I think it should be more neutral than even the modular theater is.
What's the minimum size then that you would say?
For a studio?
Well, yeah, in terms of modularity, how small did you get?
Oh, in terms of modules. Well, I don't know. I don't really know. I couldn't tell you. I wasn't thinking of modularity in minimum. I was thinking of being able to, simply the ability to be able to build it to expand to any lengths. In terms of a studio space, the minimum space for me is a space around 18 by 18 or 20 by 20 as a personal space, because I just feel most comfortable in that.
Because he has a garage with 10.
That's exactly right. I've always worked in garage. It's really that's exactly what I'm telling you. I can't change because I've always had to work in a garage. Therefore, 18 by 18, I can tell you right away what the dimensions are, or 20 by 20 are my size. And for me to have to change to fit a building would be ridiculous, because I've been doing it since I was 7 years old. I've been working in the garage. So
when you're sitting down with, say, the other people on staff giving their requirements, when you said earlier that was the way you went about it,
yeah.
What kind of idiosyncrasies did they bring to it?
Well, for instance, some people simply could not work without a window. It didn't matter to me, because working in garages, I've had to do that a lot. But some people could not work without windows. This was a problem because the building was designed with very few windows. And this meant that, like the typical temperamental musician, he refused to appear on the grounds unless he was given a window with a view. He simply could not be inspired to play without a window. Or the need for, say, desk space, a piano space, and so forth required certain kinds of things. Lighting was a big problem. That was one of the biggest problems we had, because we were given, I don't know what they originally gave, but everybody's used to lamps, and they really couldn't work without floor lamps. So after all the wonderful lighting had been put in, everybody went out to the hardware store and bought lamps, or to Salvation Army or wherever it was, and bought lamps, and the place was filled with junk lamps.
I don't mean I'm dominating, but you have how many students left in your music department?
music school is 180 students.
180. What did we set our rough out?
250 undergraduates, 40 graduates.
Yeah, you had around, that was the original. That was the original.
How many faculty did that represent?
Well, we have, the problem with faculty in a music
And how
school.
would you break them down? Let's say
Okay.
just how were they broken down? What would they
Okay, the problem with faculty in a music school is you have two basic kinds of teachers. You have the one-to-one teacher. The teacher teaches the individual instruments. And of, say, a figure of 300, that's not a hard figure to work with, of 300 students, approximately 200 will be studying privately, and they'll be playing instruments which require private instruction. And those teachers tend to be part-time teachers. This creates a whole set of problems which are very different than the other. The other teachers who, and you can simply name the number of instruments there are in the orchestra, and a few others like guitar and piano and voice. And you've got the number of teachers, part-time teachers you need. It averages out to around somewhere between 20 to 25 private teachers at the school. Then you have support courses, teachers, which, for instance, the theoretical studies, teaching people to read music better, to hear music better, and so forth. These will range on an, you can figure for 300 students, about 15 to 20 students per teacher. You'll need that many teachers, or that many, well, however you want to look at it, unless the person works around the clock. One person could do more, but then you have the advanced kinds of things like composing and facilities of that sort. And there the student-faculty ratio at most is about 11 or 12 to 1, because you're working with graduate students, and there you really need smaller seminar-type student-teacher relationships. Our faculty, when we started in the music school, all were full-time. We didn't have any part-time people. Everybody was hired full-time, and we had 40 faculty members and something like 120 students, 40 full-time faculty members, aiming toward 300 students. That was our eventual aim. So it was around a 10 to 1 ratio, not quite. It was better than a 10 to 1
How have
ratio.
you felt as the ratio drops? I mean, is there, you feel there's a...
The ratio doesn't drop.
No, I know, but I mean, you yourself have experienced this, and I know we have, and I have my own feelings about what the best ratio is, so that you never lose the dynamics of the class, and some people feel more comfortable with a few, and some people with a few more. And I just wondering, is 11 to 12 the comfortable number?
Well,
or is that
my teaching, which is not the same as obviously other people's, but my personal teaching technique is that I meet with the students, and the composition program at CalArts is designed just like the spaces are designed around my garage. The teaching is designed, the whole curriculum for composition is designed around, the approach is designed around my techniques. But I meet with the students as a group, my seminar, which happens to be 10 students. I take at the most 11, and at the minimum I take 8 between that, those two numbers, 8 to 11 students. And I meet with them 6 hours a week in various combinations, like 3 and 3, or 2 and 2 and 2, or 6, or whatever. But I've given myself 6 hours of communal time in contact with the students, at which is divided into 3 categories, but not in each week, or maybe not even in each month or each term. I have the same students for at least 1 year, and usually for 2 years. And I divide the time as a group with them between techniques that they need as a group, the majority of them need, Therefore, 4 or 5 of them may not show up for a month because they don't need that particular thing at that given time. Looking at their own music together with them and looking at other people's music, those 3 kinds of things, which might be the music of Bach, at which point we'd need a record player or room for musicians to come in, or new music or whatever. Then each student makes an appointment. I allow about 45 minutes. I have 2 studios, one to meet the students together in, which has all the facilities that I need, and the other is a private space. And I allow an average of 40 to 45 minutes per student for half the number of students per week. And they make appointments and hand their music in to me in advance, at least 24 hours in advance, which time, that's where most of my work goes, which is taking their music home, reading it, and bringing it in. And that limits the number of students. Otherwise, I could take 40 students. But that one thing limits the number of students that I can take. To really look at somebody's score requires anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours on a single score. And if I have 6 students coming to see me that week, that means I may be working 10 hours at home reading scores to be able to come in. And somewhere along the line, I think my personal feeling is that if you're studying composition with someone who doesn't do that, then you're losing something, because no one can walk in on a new score, look at it immediately, and tell you what's wrong with it. So I can't imagine a good teaching situation where a composition teacher could handle more than 10 students and still be composing music on his own. Because that amounts to, what I just said, amounts to almost 20 hours a week.
I have a very limited experience with music schools, but I have wandered through the practice rooms, let's say at a state college.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very small, they have a piano, and they keep acoustic tile all over.
Right.
And I'm just wondering what your reaction to that kind of environment is, and let's say the students that you know, how they react to that little cubicle.
We had that out right at the very beginning. Thornton can tell you about that too. Originally, the practice rooms were designed, the traditional practice room, which has been, I think they make modules now that you can buy that are acoustically good, are somewhere 6 by 10 or something like that, 6 by 9, some incredible dimension. And this, if you were to, when I confronted Thornton on this problem, all of our practice rooms, practically all of them, except the ones that needed grand pianos, were this dimension, 6 by 9 or 6 by 10. And when I confronted him, I said, how can you expect, I mean, where did you get this figure? He said, well, we did research. And sure enough, he did research. Every famous music school all over the country has 6 by 10 practice rooms. This has been as a result of a constantly diminishing, the space is diminishing and the number of people are increasing, and so the practice rooms have gotten smaller and smaller, and that's why the practice rooms are that size. But ideally, nobody likes to, I mean, you wouldn't want to have to sit in a telephone booth to play the piccolo just because you have a small instrument. And that's really what's happened with it. And we, it was very costly, but we broke through most of those and increased the size of the room. And this created logistic problems. We had to have a building that was open 24 hours a day, and we had to have, several people using the same practice room and so forth and so on. Because a music school has not decreased as much as some of the other schools in terms of numbers.
What size did you end up?
Well, again, 18 by 18 is a perfect figure, right?
Where you have 200 students being given individual teaching on instruments, I mean, that seems
Well,
to be
there are
quite
ways to
small.
solve this, and one of the ideal ways to solve this is for the students to practice in studios, not to limit this. What happens traditionally is that you go in and you take a lesson with your teacher on the piano, and then because that's a wonderful piano, and because your teacher is famous, the door gets locked. Only that teacher has a key, and he may teach 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day. For the rest of those 20 hours, no one may use that studio except the pet student maybe will be allowed in. If the student-teacher relationship is such, and we've been able to maintain this to some extent in the music school, The teacher-student relationship is such that the teacher has students he or she trusts and admires. Then you simply give the teacher more studio space. You say, like I have 2 or 3 studios personally. The students use the same facilities I use. I don't have special facilities at the school. We didn't separate faculty's facilities from student facilities. This meant that the students get better pianos to use, and if I manage to have with my 10 students, or let me put it this way, there's a formula for it. If every faculty member in the school has X number of students and manages to have a space to teach those students, then those students ought to be able to use that same space, because if you divide the time, or maybe a little bit of additional space, then you have enough space automatically by having enough space for the teacher to teach his or her 10 students, and then a couple of neutral spaces. So we have the smaller practice rooms for spillover, and the students for chamber music and all this use their teachers' studios. And this is great because it means the teacher can't come in and teach any more than a certain number of hours, and the studio space is being taken, and that's really the ideal way to do it. No student should have to be put through something that a teacher himself wouldn't want to live with. If a teacher is willing to teach and work in a 6x10 space, then you can put the student in there.
But then there still is that individual practice time that breaks down.
Yeah, but that works out. If you figure, we worked this out once. If you figure if a student practices 4 hours a day, which is about average, and you have 24 hours in a day, you have created, without any teaching going on in a room, you've created half of the time for those 10 students. Most teachers don't have 10 students in the private instruction. They have 4 or 5. So even if they only were able to practice half of their time in a decent facility and the other half in someone else's facility and let them wander around and scrounge spaces, or have the 6x10 for the other half of the practice time, you're still a whole lot better off. To make more studio space and not have quite enough for every individual student. Those spaces are just not used. Those 6x10 spaces are simply not used. We use them for storage and for the spillover when a person has to do something. The kids would rather work at 2 o'clock in the morning and go into a decent space than to walk in at 10 o'clock in the morning into a 6x10 cubicle.
What if their living was tighter to their teaching? I mean, again, to the learning, would that be an advantage?
Yeah, it would be
Their
terrific.
living could then be their practice.
Yeah,
Is
right.
possible?
That would really be ideal.
Didn't you
We
mention-
dreamt those things at the beginning.
Didn't you mention earlier that the students didn't like that?
No, they would like it if the working facilities were in the lifestyle of the students.
So then only the dorms were separated out.
I mean, if we had a real community, which involved the ideal place. I happened to pass Jerome, Arizona, just around the time that I was. In fact, I think it was on the trip out from New York. I went through past Jerome, Arizona, and it was for sale at the time, and that would have been yeah, the whole tent. It was a ghost tent. I think they're now selling it, or selling parts of it or something. Jerome, Arizona would make a wonderful school, a town, a real community. And, you know, old houses, and people live in parts of them, and that would really be ideal.
What you're saying is found places are better than a pre-designed.
I think because of the reason you said with my 18 by 18 is that if you started working by the time you're a kid, you're used to a house to live in. You're not used to a hospital, which is what this felt like when we moved in. So you feel more comfortable in that kind of an environment. Or industrial spaces, which is what most artists have had to deal with. And they tend to be neutral, and they tend to be really
What's the
workable.
difference? You have no choice either way.
What's the difference with what?
Why would they why would they easier adapt to a garage or an industrial space when you have a design space? They both have no choice either way.
I think for
One-
two reasons that pop into my head immediately. One is that, 3 reasons. One is that we're used to it, and we've been doing it most of our lives. And I don't know why I should have to change what I'm used to, what makes me feel better in composing my music in order to satisfy someone's need to walk through and see a nice building. That's one. Two, these so-called found spaces, the more neutral spaces, don't dictate to you, or they're not imposing on you. They don't tell you, don't write on the walls. They don't tell you, don't put a hole in this wall. Don't put a nail in this wall. Don't open the windows because the air conditioning won't work. Don't do this, don't do that. They say, this is yours and make of it what you want. You can't put anything up on the walls because you try to nail and the nail goes like that. I mean, they're very imposing, as comfortable as they might be for all kinds of
So
reasons.
it's not, I misunderstood you. I forgot that you were specifically talking about just CalArts. So it's just CalArts that's imposing. It's not
No, most
anything that you've ever seen has been imposing.
most buildings most buildings that are institutions, let's say, are quite imposing. The old Juilliard, the old building was really, they were overstuffed in there, but most of the people who were in the old Juilliard were much happier than in the new Juilliard, which is a brand new building, which is a showcase
You might check
building.
into the history of the Yale School of Architecture, done by Rudolph. Find out what happened there. Similar.
Is it not a move?
Essentially, what you're saying is that we should hope that SCI-Arc never builds a new building.
Well,
That's one way of doing it. The other way is to figure out what the essence of the found space is and design that kind of space. And I think that's a real challenge.
yeah, because the old space has terrific limitations in it in terms of just things like wiring, acoustics. The first studio I had a long time ago, the wiring was such that every time the refrigerator went on, it made a 60-cycle hum on the tapes and things like that. And so I'm not advocating no new buildings, or I'm not advocating good facilities or up-to-date or state-of-the-art facilities. It's just this other problem. It has to do also with an aesthetic sense of being. That was the third thing I was going to mention. Being in a showcase. I don't think any of you would like to live in a showcase. You wouldn't want to live in a fishbowl where you're being told that you shouldn't wear this kind of clothes or this kind of this, or you shouldn't put this up on the wall or do this or that because people are going to come by to look, to admire the thing, and you can't, open the window or do all these kinds of things. That's the lifestyle is very imposing in those things too.
So in other words, an ideal situation for you would be an empty, maybe high-ceiling warehouse with flexible partitions where you could just change the whole thing?
I don't know. The reason that you're in architecture and I'm in music is that I require somebody to give me some ideas, and I can tell you what I like.
Yeah, but that's setting you no boundaries is what I'm saying, and then
Well,
you would go in
I
and
don't
change
know.
it all to
I
suit.
don't know. I would have to really think about it. You'd have to show me what it was, and I'd have to deal with it. I would assume my quick answer would be yes, but that would be an unthought through answer, and I've learned better than that.
Were you in the studio space now?
We just passed through.
I'm
Yeah.
just wondering whether that would be a reasonable space in any way whatsoever for a music school. It works fine for an architectural design school
Well,
or for an art school. I was just
to
wondering.
have a giant space that you could then build, I could say with a certain amount of certainty that to have a giant space that you could build into it relatively inexpensively, that's really important. Any kind of smaller space that you want within certain restrictions, obviously, would be ideal, and that those spaces could then be either added onto or changed inexpensively in the future because of the changing needs of the faculty and the students as it changes. If you could have something very organic that would have the capacity to change and grow, what's really required is that the architecture of a building takes on the nature of the avant-garde art that it's trying to house. And the nature of the avant-garde art is high degree of individuality, specialization. Each artist is a very different animal from every other artist, even the visual arts from one to the other, and that each generation or each new group of artists tends to overthrow the last group, and so the building has to be able to overthrow itself as it moves through. You may find the next generation requires a space with the old desks, you know, with the inkwells and a blackboard in front, and that shouldn't be a surprise if that happens. That should be accounted for as a possible change, to put mahogany on the walls or something, and to make it old and traditional.
You mentioned the fact of being involved in a school where you come out and you didn't realize the sun went down. How do you feel about where CalArts is going to get now?
Yeah, that was another thing when you asked about the space here. One of the primary things also is that we fought really hard to keep CalArts from going out to Valencia. There were several possibilities. One was to stay in Villa Cabrini, which is Burbank, which isn't the greatest location in the world, but even that was better. Another possibility was to move into an area near Hancock Park, which would have been terrific. Or in Hollywood, there was a chance to get some land in Hollywood, right off of the freeway. I think that at the moment, and for the last several generations, and probably for a few to come, the artist feels more comfortable in a semi-blue-collar atmosphere than in a semi-industrial or at least industrial business residential neighborhood and community than in the fishbowl out in Valencia or some posh rural thing, unless it's real isolation, like that would be an entirely different kind of, like some of the think tanks and things where you go off into the mountains somewhere. But for everyday work that people are involved in, I think some kind of contact with the world is really essential.
What about the relationships between the other arts as far as music? I mean, is there, you talked about isolation.
Oh yeah, that's probably a really important thing too in terms of what you're doing. I was brought in along with two other people as the experts in multimedia and interdisciplinary arts. The irony was that that's because I had done a lot of work in various areas. But the irony was that I was almost single-handedly against interdisciplinary curriculum and interdisciplinary facilities. And the reason, and it's turned out to be absolutely true, the reason is that if you have dedicated artists, a guy who really wants to write music, real dedicated person, he doesn't want any amateur coming in and fooling with his equipment. He wants as much time as he can with it, and he wants to spend it along with people who really know what they're doing. He wants proximity to minds, and to ideas, and to other people's works. He'd like to collaborate with them in some way, but he doesn't want to share his facilities. There's no way a painter can come in and take the kind of specialized courses that electronic music composer is going to be taking. That's a kind of dilettante, that interdisciplinary thing. What's really happened is that the walls all closed, all the doors closed. The film school is terrifically isolated and their equipment is hard to get your hands on. The music school is very closed and it's hard to get your hands on that equipment, and so forth and so on. And if we had just dealt with that right from the beginning, we would have saved a whole lot of grief and a lot of money in the process. Social interaction was not dealt with, and that should have been dealt with. One of the things that we felt was really important was the building of things like very high-energy coffee spaces, coffee shops, and eating areas. Food and drink is really an important thing, and we did manage to do it a little bit with a bookstore. We wanted the bookstore and the library to be one and the same. We wanted the coffee house, the cafeteria, so to speak, and to be adjacent with the library and the bookstore so that they were interchangeable. And we had a lot of, I'd be glad to give you some of those ideas, a lot of ideas for these. Maury Stein, unfortunately, the guy who was in the critical studies, and I had designed these, and he was let go 3 months after it started, so that the Stein Subotnick coffee house idea died as he left the place. But we
You still
wanted.
have those programs that were written? Or any
Yeah,
of
I
them?
still have a lot of them
Might be
that we
interesting
did. Yeah.
to get if we had a copy so that everybody could kind of weed through them just to see some of the thoughts.
Yeah. In fact, some of them are built into the building. There is an actual room called the coffee house with a sound and light booth associated with it, because that's where we were going to have individual, like on airlines, where each person have an earphone and you plug it in to a spot on your table, and you could dial a lecture that had happened in the previous week and watch it and listen to it while you're drinking your coffee, simultaneous with 2 people having a conversation next to you. So that if this would be relatively simple. It's
Did
not
you
a
get into that kind of video use
Yeah.
CalArts?
No,
we're
we
doing now, say we're recording.
No.
So that they can
We bought,
feedback.
I was involved in the buying process, and we bought video, this kind of video equipment, approximately 1 for every 4 to 5 classrooms as such. But in music school, there were only 4 or 5 classes. We have 1 of them. And I'm the only one who's used it out of the 40 faculty members, because you can't teach old dogs new tricks too easily. And as useful as it might be, no one really used them. I must admit that some ideas probably would not have been used by most of the people, just because I was deeply involved with media, and so it was something that I really saw as a possibility. But most of the singing teachers and the violin teachers were simply threatened by any knob they had to turn or any button they had to push, and have refused to use them. We had thought, and I still think this is a good idea, we had thought that certain kinds of media, cheap media like technology, like the little monaural Craig cassette players, could be given to every student. And every student would be given an earphone, and in place of a paper and pencil. And we actually did some investigation and found out you can get them, if you do them in quantity, you can get them at half price. And when you consider the amount of theft that would ordinarily go on to anything that would be checked out, that we would have to reorder everything within a year anyway. And within 3 years, we would have made it would have made its investment. And the morale would be incredible to hand everybody something that you were going to have to pay for eventually anyway.
Talking about that, just one more. How about the economics of CalArts at this point in time? Or is that never, because we will be dealing with this as a private school, and we will be calling an economist in to talk to some of the issues, and I assume that with the size and the scale and everything else, the support is would it could it make it go without the support from, say, the foundation that supports it?
The Disney Foundation, no. There is no way that I know of that could happen, period, in a school of this nature. We're dependent on the Disneys for about 2/3 of the funding of the school, and the other third comes from loans and student tuition. And in order to keep the quality up, you have to be fairly lenient with scholarships.
And was the building paid for just right out?
The
or
building, I
did that
believe,
pay
was
for it?
very close. The figure that comes to mind is $29 million for the entire
But is that being
start.
taken out of the?
Some of it may be in loans. I think maybe whatever they can get from loans from the government. But the majority of it, I think like $15 million in cash was set aside and laid out, which is a sizable sum of money.
And could you just talk, I know it's very highly equipped. What would you say is the over-equipped CalArts, or
I think
at this point, how much is not being used?
I think nothing. We, well, partly because attrition, theft is, in the first 2 years of an institution is somewhere up around 18% of hard technological things are ripped off of walls or stolen in some way. Then that decreases appreciably after that, because you learn how to control things, but it takes time. There's no standard way to do it. So we lost about 20% right off the bat, you know, just in terms of theft. But I think that was the one area that we bought extremely well in. And after the first year, there was no budget for further buying. But as far as I know, we're still an extremely well-equipped school. And
it's all in use.
it's all in use, yeah. There's
Do you get involved with the community out there, your location, like having concerts or the students teaching on their own?
no, see, a little bit, but it's not the kind of community, that's what I was talking about earlier. It's not the kind of community that sits terribly well with the kind of students that, and the kind of artists who would teach there. Nobody I've known has been able to live in that community for very long. You know, in the tract houses or whatever that's around there. And so they tend to end up living in either LA or in the hills or the mountains or in the small towns that take 25 to 30 minutes to get there, that are fairly isolated. It's not a very conducive community to working.
Did you find that would help in the instruction of, or the function of the school, if the students were able to relate to the?
Yeah, I think it's, in terms of the education of the students, that would be very important. That just their lives, that they could be infected by the same, you know, germs that everybody else is infected, instead of being kept isolated from what the world's like. It's a bedroom community, and those are the worst kind of two.
Is there any thought given to maybe constructing student-type apartments?
Yeah, there was.
Off campus?
Yeah, there was. In the original Gruen plan of Valencia, they were going to build loft spaces above the business districts. I don't know whether that's still going to happen or whether it's been knocked out. That's one of the better ideas, I think, that they had, because there are not. There was a master plan for Valencia, and that was part of the master plan. Inexpensive loft spaces above grocery stores, and it was a nice idea.
Do you find personally that being in that kind of proximity where you're not in an intense urban situation, or even
I'm talking about Los Angeles.
LA, or even Santa Monica, I consider fairly intense. Do you find it affects the students' work? Like, let's say, visual artists.
No, I don't think it has a very profound effect, because the students have compensated for it by you know, moving into other communities, and I just think it's an unfortunate thing for both the community and the students that they can't have a more easy access to the world that they're related to.
You mentioned before about hiring new faculty members, and how since the students stay the same over a period of 4 to 6 years, it's kind of tough to maybe instigate new plans through a faculty member. Do you think that's a good or a bad thing?
I think it's terrific. It means that the initial concept that the students would be dictating their curriculum has really worked. People thought that it really wasn't happening, but the fact is you have to have certain teachers, because the students have demanded certain courses, and they're built in now into the curriculum, and you have to keep remanning certain departments in exactly the same way with the same kind of people, because the demands of the students have gradually seeped into the consciousness of the administration. And there's no way, when you start looking around, that you have a contract with those students. You've got to have a teacher who can teach X, Y, or Z of a particular sort.
Do you feel then that that's perhaps not a help to a new student who comes in with a very innovative program and can't necessarily find someone that would teach it the way you want?
Yeah, I think this is a problem that I don't know how we're going to solve, which is that every new child you bring into the world has fewer options than Adam had at the beginning. I mean, he's got a lot more to overthrow to get what he wants out of it. So I think that's true in an institution too. There's
Okay, and one more point on that. How much involvement do the students have in choosing professors? I know the University of California had a problem,
well, you can.
Santa Barbara, for instance.
I said something at the very beginning which you probably didn't register as to its importance. If there are no requirements and there are no grades, there's nothing to keep a student from doing whatever he chooses to do. So a student has complete freedom as to what he chooses to take and with whom he chooses to take it. Since there's nothing to say he's not going to graduate. There's nothing about the courses he takes or how well he does. It's only how well he produces his art at the end. So the student at the moment has complete freedom in that area.
We were talking about understanding the different lifestyles of the students. Is there, do you see any difference between like maybe the music and the theatrical students? Lifestyle?
No, not a big difference. They're all, it's hard to tell one from the other, really.
We're gonna have to cut off, but I promised to get him back.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe we can get you back another time.
Okay, I'd be glad to do, like if you have work out some specific questions about spaces and things like that, I'd be glad to give you.
Say as we get into the programming, which will take place in about a week, then maybe it'd be good to
Yeah,
go through
yeah.
the critical analysis. And I was wondering,